Hello, everybody. How's it going? Welcome. As you're rolling in to this Letterform lecture, just remember to type where you're coming from in the chat so we know where our international audience is coming from today. And remember, if you have questions for our speaker, we'll deal with those after the talk, and please drop them in the Q&A so that we have a nice list to go from. Happy New Year. Welcome to Letterform Lectures online edition. My name is Grendel. I'm Education Director at Letterform Archive, which is also the home of Type West, our School of Type Design. And like I just said, please type in where you're coming from in the chat as people roll in and as we get set up. And I would like to give a big shout out at this point to Skilla Zaccolini, who is once again working her magic in the background for this lecture series. Thank you so much, Skilla. Next up, Letterform Archive is the home of Type West, and we have a slew of great lectures and workshops coming up in 2022, so check our website for more details. But first, I want to say a hearty congratulations to the Type West graduating class of 2021. I am proud to announce that the Type West Postgraduate Certificate Program of Type Design class of 2021 has graduated. It's our first fully online program ever. And if you missed the formal ceremony and the public showing of their typefaces, no worries, it's all up on our Vimeo channel. Skilla will drop the link for that in the chat, so please check it out. We have some more events on the horizon that I want to tell you about, some workshops, how to make mistakes on purpose with Lori Rosenwald. So check your perfectionism at the door and get messy with Lori as you create the foundations of your new alphabetic style. Or maybe you'll just make a big inky mess and have a good time doing it. Anyways, this March workshop, it will be in person at the archive. Keep your eyes open on our website. It's coming up. And in April, we have Hope Meng returning. Hope is the mastermind behind the Monogram project, and she will share her secrets with you and guide you through the iterative process of creating luscious monograms in this Monogram Mania workshop, which is also going to be up on our website soon. Our next lecture in the Letterform Lecture series is with J. Dakota Brown for a labor history of typography, really looking at the backstory behind where we are now typographically and looking at the workers that helped us get there and the labor conflicts that happened along the way. So don't miss this one. It's going to be amazing, March 1st. And here is our gallery is open. Yes. And our exhibit, which is up through April 27th, is Bauhaus Typography at 100. We have a bunch of curator tours coming up, and our gallery hours are every week. So check out our website and get your tickets now. Don't miss this show. It's great. For this and for all our Letterform lectures and our workshops, learn more and register at letterarch.org/events. Or better yet, become a Letterform Archive member today. Stay in the loop and get cool perks. To help keep great lectures like today's going, go to letterarch.org/join and become a member, please. Okay, welcome to Letterform Lectures 2022, our first lecture of the year. Our slides are co-presented by SFPL Book Arts and Special Collections and by the Letterform Archive, which is a nonprofit institution housing over 60,000 works of graphic design history. We are dedicated to the art and the craft of the letterform, and we'd like to thank Adobe for generously sponsoring the video recording of this lecture series. You can view all Letterform lectures online soon after they happen. Just check the website, letterformarchive.org. Okay, We are honored to welcome our speaker today, Kamal Mansour, who is a linguist who worked for 25 years at the typographic firm Monotype and who has taught courses on writing systems at Stanford University. So Kamal told us that since childhood, he's been curious about languages, and the seed for his interest was sown through an introduction to calligraphy in elementary school. In his career at Monotype, Kamal leaned on his background in linguistics to study the logical foundation of various types of writing, and he got to dissect the typographic details of numerous writing systems with the aim of putting them back into more orderly form. And as Kamal's daughter declared when she was 5 years old, Kamal gets to play with ABCs all day long. Lucky Kamal. And Kamal reported that he must be a fast learner since it's only taken him 6 decades to learn some tidbits about human writing. He told us also that as a young college student, when he was attending a course in phonetics, he was listening as the professor described the specific pronunciation features of his Appalachian regional dialect of English. And surprised by these unusual features, Kamal raised his hand and innocently asked if English was his native language. The professor apparently glared and his classmates all started cracking up, but Kamal was mortified. However, he persisted in his studies to our great benefit today. So without further ado, let's all welcome Kamal Mansour. Kamal, you are on. I am going to stop sharing and pass it over to you.
Okay. Thank you for joining me today. During our time together, I hope to share with you some global features and trends of writing that often go unnoticed. Nowadays, we all live in a world saturated with writing. We're surrounded by large displays and posters and traffic signs. Over the past 20 years, we've even come to consider it normal to send each other instant messages of text through the ether. To readjust our perspective a little bit, let's go back in time to when writing was still relatively new. We've landed in ancient Egypt, as you can see. Rosetta is in her studio, laboring over a stone as she inscribes a royal decree. In school, she had excelled in Greek as a second language and in history too. When it came time to give instructions to the installation team, she told them to go where to place the stone so that Napoleon's soldiers would bump into it almost 2 millennia later. Today, the Rosetta Stone is housed at the British Museum in London. If it looks like it's floating in midair, don't worry, it's not. The stone weighs over 700 kilograms or around 1,600 pounds. It was already damaged at the top when Napoleon's soldiers found it near the shore of the Mediterranean in the town of Rashid, or Rosetta, in the European version of the name. We can see clearly it's divided into 3 sections. The top part shows hieroglyphic writing, the middle section, Demotic writing, and the bottom, Greek. Here we see magnified details of each section. The word hieroglyphic and demotic are Greek terms for 2 styles of hieroglyphic writing. The Greek is all in what we would call today uppercase uncial. Actually, that was the norm back then. No other form existed. You might be wondering why there's also Greek writing on the Rosetta Stone. Since Alexander the Great conquered Egypt around 300 BC, it came to be ruled by a Greek Macedonian family called the Ptolemies, who introduced Greek as the official language of government. We speak of that period as Ptolemaic Egypt, and it's the beginning of the Greco-Roman period in Egyptian history. At the time of the discovery of the stone, scholars could only read the Greek section, no one knew what the other parts meant. Most European scholars at the time believed that the Egyptian hieroglyphics were magical symbols that the priests had invented to keep knowledge to themselves alone. Champollion and several other scholars thought that was nonsense. They firmly believed that hieroglyphic text represented the Egyptian language. Champollion is generally credited with deciphering the writing, but he also benefited from the work and attempts of others. Like any classically trained scholar at the time, he knew Greek. He had also studied Coptic, the later stage of the Egyptian language. That gave him some idea of the sounds and structure. He followed the reasonable hypothesis that the three sections appearing on the Rosetta Stone said the same thing. They had the same message. This was one of the keys that finally led to the decipherment of Egyptian writing. The Greek extract shown here refers to King Ptolemy, as you can see in yellow, Basileus Ptolemaeus. Based on existing information, Champollion guessed also that the hieroglyphics enclosed in the cartouche in the yellow section above also referred to a royal name. Elsewhere on the stone, there is a similar cartouche with a mention of Cleopatra in the Greek text. As the first part of the decipherment, Champollion worked out that the hieroglyphic symbols in the cartouche were partially alphabetic. You can see here the makeup of the name Ptolemies. And as you can see, it's written from right to left, since hieroglyphics could be written in either direction. We could say that Champollion took the first step of 1,000 others towards decipherment. On the stone, we've seen two styles of ancient Egyptian writing, hieroglyphic and demotic. Here we see all four styles as written on papyrus, not inscribed in stone. The names of these styles are Greek in origin, they're not Egyptian. Hieroglyphic means sacred symbols, and it is this section. Hieratic is a priestly style, equivalent to hieroglyphics, but no longer pictorial. Demotic is a further simplification, similar to hieratic. And finally, down here, we see Coptic, which is an alphabet based on the Greek one, with extensions for additional sounds of the Egyptian language. The style shown here is identical to Greek writing at the time, and later on, distinctly Egyptian styles also developed. In time, ancient Egyptian writing in all three of its original forms died and was completely supplanted by the Coptic alphabet. It turns out that deciphering Egyptian writing was an extremely difficult task because it represented a very complex system. The demotic and hieratic forms of the writing turned out to be mostly visual simplifications of the hieroglyphic. At its most developed stage, how did hieroglyphic writing work? How did it work, excuse me? In three modes. Basically, a symbol could represent one of three things. First, it can represent its obvious pictorial meaning. Second, it can represent a category of things. Third, it can represent a sound or phonetic value. Here we see the symbol for house, and it mimics the enclosure of a typical courtyard of the time. The symbol is pronounced pur. So in this case, we're looking at pur, meaning house, just representing itself. Here we see four hieroglyphic symbols that can also be used as categories. So for example, the first one, which represents a woman, can also represent the category of female person. So in a piece of text that is talking about a person, this can be added to say By the way, this is a female person. The second symbol represents walking or the category of running, moving. The third symbol represents the sun. It can also mean the category of light or time. The house symbol, which we've seen before, can mean building, dwelling, or a place. Now we come to the third type of use of the hieroglyphics, which is for sound value or phonetics. Here's a list of hieroglyphics that represent one consonant each. Many tourists visiting Egypt today come away with a cartouche that supposedly shows their names using this alphabet. There were also two other sets of symbols that represented 2 consonant and 3 consonant sound sequences. So if you're reading a text of Egyptian hieroglyphics, you need to decide on the go which symbols are intended in which of the 3 modes: direct meaning, category, or phonetic. Of course, there were also hints in the text on how to read the symbols. So why are we talking about ancient Egyptian writing when it's extinct? Because it leads us to the first alphabet. We've just seen that alphabetic writing was a part of ancient Egyptian script. So you might ask, why aren't the ancient Egyptians credited with the invention of the alphabet? It's because they never wrote their language exclusively with alphabetic characters. It was either by choice or through lack of insight. We don't know. However, we know that it was in the Egyptian environment of the time that the first alphabet was born. This sphinx was found in the first years of the 20th century at the site of an ancient Egyptian turquoise mine in Sinai, a place called Sarabat al-Khadem. With the exception of this upper part here, which shows hieroglyphic symbols, alphabetic symbols that can give a reasonable interpretation in the Canaanite language, this phrase can be interpreted as an homage to the deity Baalat, represented here as a statue of the Egyptian goddess Hathor. Several of the symbols resemble hieroglyphics. In the same vicinity, other rocks were engraved with additional symbols. Here's a collection of them. The alphabet came to be called Proto-Sinaitic because of where it was invented. Now, who was the inventor? It's a nameless person, literate or illiterate, we don't know, but familiar with Egyptian symbols. It was somebody who spoke a Canaanite language. And allow me to give him a nice name so we don't talk about him anonymously. How about a Canaanite name like Ahiram? Ahiram must have been a very clever, intuitive fellow. If he was a migrant laborer, it's unlikely that he took any evening classes in phonetics at the Sinai Institute of Mining. He didn't have time for that. Let's think about his accomplishment for a moment. He identified every consonantal sound in his native language and matched each one to a unique symbol. He named every letter after its visual image. So when you see a symbol and pronounce its name, the first sound tells you what it stands for. It works a bit like A for apple, B for boy in English. For example, the house symbol was called Bet. Bet means house and stood for the B sound. The head symbol was called Resh and represented the R sound. He had no idea that scholars one day would call his invention a mnemonic device based on the acrophonic principle. Simplicity is such a hard thing to swallow sometimes. By the way, some Egyptian characters were also acrophonic. So that idea is not entirely new, but not all of them were. Ahiram's alphabet is fully acrophonic. It was pictorial, so people could recognize what the symbol stood for. If you saw a fish like we see here, you would say sameh, and sameh gives you an S for the first sound. So you know the fish represents the S. Scholars had a nice date estimated for this invention, assuming it took place at the same time as the inscriptions were found in Sinai. In 2005, however, a team of archaeologists led by John Darnell found similar inscriptions in the south of Egypt, very, very far from Sinai, setting the date back by another 200 years and casting doubt on the presumed location of the invention. Finally, here are the sound values of some of the sound values of the Proto-Semitic alphabet. The middle columns here show us the various forms that the same symbol could appear in different inscriptions, as well as the simplified form that was later reached in the Phoenician alphabet. We're not showing many steps in the transition here, but suffice it to say there is other evidence for other stages. For a variety of reasons, some scholars prefer to call this alphabet Canaanite instead of Phoenician. For simplicity's sake, I'll just use the popular name of Phoenician. In these two different inscriptions, we see the complete transition from Proto-Semitic to Phoenician form. All the symbols have become simpler and linear in form and are no longer in any recognizable way pictorial. Through years of trade, the Phoenician alphabet in the Mediterranean and many derivative alphabets sprang up. Here we see an inscription in Phoenician. Basically, it spread all around the Mediterranean, and we see evidence for this in Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, Greece, Cyprus and Crete, the Italian peninsula, and Iberia. Many alphabets, not just Greek, as the story is often told. So also, for the Greek, many varieties of the Greek coexisted. There was also a significant transition from archaic to classical Greek, reflecting changes in pronunciation and differences in dialects. In the end, the Athenian model won the competition and led to a surge in the spread of Greek classical literature. In the Italian area, likewise, many alphabets competed. There was the Etruscan, the Umbrian, the Latin, and several others. They all had many, many similarities. And as you can see here, they're not so different from some of the forms you see in Greek. Likewise, here, for example, is an ABC in Old Latin, written from right to left. Bidirectional writing was very common in this period. In the end, for political reasons, the Latin or Roman alphabet won because of Rome's dominance. Here we see a comparison of letter forms between Phoenician and Older Greek in the Attic region, where Athens is located. The Greeks borrowed some letters with their Phoenician names, added some for sounds not in Phoenician, and most importantly, extended the alphabet to include vowels. The names of the letters are often similar to those in Phoenician, but they're meaningless in Greek. Aleph in Phoenician meant ox. Alpha in Greek just meant the first letter. Several Greek letters shown here were used by ancient Greek, but got dropped due to changes in pronunciation at a later time. If you're familiar with the modern Greek alphabet, possibly through math or through the language, You probably will not recognize the digama. You will not recognize the san. You will not recognize the kopa, but you'll recognize many of the others, even though some of the forms are a bit different today. Because the Greeks included vowels in their alphabet, it is often called the first full alphabet. Now let's continue with the spread and influence of the Greek alphabet. Towards the Balkans, north of Greece, the Glagolitic and Cyrillic alphabets were invented for the service of Slavic languages. And of course, they moved northeast as well later on for the use with Russian and similar languages. To the south in Egypt, the Coptic alphabet became the script for Egyptian, and as we've noted, replaced the use of hieroglyphics altogether. Northwest, a Germanic language called Gothic adopted a version of the Greek alphabet, but soon died out. To the east, in the Caucasus, the structure of the Greek alphabet was followed in the formation of the Armenian and Georgian alphabet, although there is little visual resemblance. As the Greek alphabet spread, Greek scholarship and literature gained a foothold in the Mediterranean. Centers like Alexandria held huge collections of Greek writing. By the time of the Roman period, the Greek language had become the common language, or lingua franca, of the Mediterranean basin. Now let's look at the Eastern Mediterranean. The Phoenician alphabet had its effects there as well. Many variations developed, but we're going to look at 4 specific alphabets that are worth noting. All 4 of these alphabets were used to write Semitic languages. By that, we are referring to a family of languages with a common ancestry that today includes Arabic, Hebrew, and Amharic. The first of the alphabets is Aramaic. It was eventually adopted as the administrative language and script for the Persian Empire. As it spread eastward, variants were also adapted to languages from unrelated families like Persian. In the end, it came to be used from Egypt as far east as India. The second script to examine here is Samaritan, also known as Ancient Hebrew. This was a script originally used for the Hebrew language, but later abandoned for a variant of the Aramaic script. Here we see South Arabian, which was used for the languages of Southern Arabia, including Sabaean. If you've heard of the Kingdom of Sheba or the Queen of Sheba, you know about the Saba people. Later on, when the Saba people migrated to the Horn of Africa, they took this script with them, but there it turned into a new kind of script, as we'll see a bit later. Finally, up here we see Eugerity. Now for the Addak and the family, this script does not resemble its origins at all. As both the script and the language, Eugerity was discovered in the early 20th century on the Mediterranean coast in northern Syria. As you might be able to see, it looks like Mesopotamian writing, also known as cuneiform. In fact, this clay tablet is a list of the ABCs for the Ugaritic language. 29 letters, all consonants, are used to represent the Ugaritic language. It follows the same structure of other derivatives of Proto-Semitic, but the letter shapes are Mesopotamian in origin. The Ugaritic alphabet reflects a split in sound repertoires among Semitic languages. Basically, two branches developed. One had a set of 29 consonants and is similar to South Arabian and later Arabic, while Aramaic and Hebrew had only 22. The discovery of Ugaritic literature has been useful in interpreting Hebrew scriptures because of the similarity between the languages. Ugaritic vanished, and we're not sure why. Finally, Ugaritic demonstrates that the concept of an alphabet as a list of all the sounds of a language had really been established. The concept was so strong, you could ignore the form of the letters as long as you knew what they represented. After the collapse of the Persian Empire, several offshoots of Aramaic script began to develop. Let's focus on four of them: Hebrew, Syriac, Nabatean, and Arabic. At the top here, we see Hebrew. After a period of exile in Mesopotamia, the Jewish people abandoned use of the older Samaritan alphabet and developed a special style of Aramaic script that came to be called Hebrew square script. At the time, the Hebrew language began its decline as a daily language and was replaced by Aramaic. However, Hebrew remained the religious language. The Hebrew sacred scriptures were written in the new Hebrew script, as evidenced by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, of which this is an extract. In the following 2 millennia, Hebrew script was also adapted by Jewish communities in different areas in writing various regional languages, such as Arabic, Yiddish, and Ladino. In the late 19th century, Hebrew script was adopted for the newly revived Hebrew language. Let's move to Syriac next. Although it is not well known today, the Syriac language and its script have left an indelible mark on modern civilization. During the peak of their civilization, the Syriac people developed a rich literary culture, and their language came to be highly esteemed in the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean. In addition to their own writings, a significant body of Greek texts were translated into Syriac. The sample shown here is actually from a translation of a work by the Greek physician Galen. Later on, many of the Syriac versions of Greek texts were translated into Arabic, reviving knowledge that had been lost to Europe for centuries. When they were finally translated to Latin, these texts became part of the body of knowledge that fed the Renaissance. Thirdly, we come to the Nabatean script. The Nabateans were an Arabic-speaking people who continued the tradition of the Persian Empire of writing their records in Aramaic. Their kingdom was situated along trading routes in what is now Jordan. Like Syriac, Nabatean script was a branch of Imperial Aramaic. After the Romans sacked the Nabatean kingdom, Nabatean script was slowly transformed into the ancestral form of Arabic writing. Many scholars believe that Syriac script was also an influence in the early style of fully formed Arabic script. Looking at Arabic next, as the Arab Empire expanded in North Africa, the Levant, and further eastward, the Arabic language and script gained dominance and gradually overtook Syriac. Because of its spread over a broad geographic area, many regional styles of Arabic script were developed. Various periods of artistic endeavor led to unprecedented refinement of its letter forms. Over the centuries, Arabic script was adapted to the writing of a large number of unrelated language. So we've spent some time in the Mediterranean. Why don't we go off to China then to look at a drastically different ancient writing system? The Chinese writing tradition is one of the few for which we have a good record of its long transitional stages. From the pictorial, we move to the abstract. In this illustration, in the first column, we see the modern depiction of the ideographs for woman, heart, and music. In the remaining column, we see the most pictorial stage of the symbol moving towards the right to the least pictorial and resembling current standards. Usually in the development of an ancient script, we don't have such a clear transition of many stages. There are three main types of Chinese characters that I'd like to present here. The first is ideographs. Ideographs have a pictorial origin, although in their modern form, it's often very difficult to guess, often unrecognizable. Here we see four ideographs. The first represents the sun, second represents the moon, third, the tree, and lastly, the horse. These symbols can mean just what they represent. If you put the symbol, you just mean to say tree. In the second type of Chinese characters, we have compound ideographs. Basically, the combination of two symbols. Here we have the symbol meaning forest, which was originally composed by putting two tree symbols next to each other. Here we see the symbol for bright. It was composed by putting the characters for sun and moon together. So the first gives us a kind of plural entity of sorts. We progress from the tree to a forest. The second one, we have a semantic compound of sorts, where the light of the sun and moon together imply the meaning of bright. In the third type, which is the most common, we have phonosemantic ideographs. What does that mean? It means sound plus meaning. So each symbol contains a semantic element and a sound element, a phonetic element. The first element hints at the category in general, and the second element hints at the sound. Let's look at the first one. This character means mother. It's composed of two elements. This represents a female person, so this is the semantic part. It's a category of female person. The second part gives us a hint. This sounds like horse, sounds like ma. Putting these two together, we come up with the meaning of mother. Female person sounds like ma. I don't speak Chinese, so please don't hold me accountable for what I say, what I pronounce. In the second compound ideograph here that we see means washing one's hair. The first part is a semantic entity for water, moisture, wetness. The second one is a sound for mu. These two together give the meaning of washing one's hair. Finally, we've seen the tree symbol before. Here we see it used as a category of tree in general. And the second element hints at the sound of something like gong. Together, this comes to mean this is a pine tree. I think it's pronounced something like song. So using the combination of a semantic element and a phonetic element, a great many meanings can be conveyed. These examples serve to dispel the popular myth that Chinese characters are all pictorial, when in fact they provide the meaning, they provide the reader with hints for meaning and pronunciation. In modern Chinese, this category accounts for more than 90% of all characters. I am ignoring some minor categories, but for our purposes, this is sufficient. So several factors contributed to the spread of Chinese script. First, the creation of a large body of writing. Second, the invention of paper. Third, the use of printing to create copies of the works. Classical Chinese literature gained prestige and recognition in East Asia. The script spread primarily to Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. Vietnamese belongs to the same language family as Chinese, so adaptation to that language wasn't so difficult. Korean and Japanese have a fundamentally different structure compared to Chinese, and they struggled a bit with fitting Chinese writing to their language. Eventually, a special syllabic system called Hangul was created for Korean, and that system prevails today. For Japanese, a different situation resulted. With the acceptance of Chinese script, Japanese also absorbed a large number of Chinese words. The difficulty of using Chinese characters was eventually resolved by adding special syllabic characters called kana syllabaries, specifically two of them, one called hiragana and the other called katakana. The Japanese added a layer of complexity to Chinese script by allowing some characters to have two readings, one Chinese and the other native. The flexibility of the Chinese writing system was also used in Japan to create exclusively Japanese characters. So as a result, the Japanese writing system is quite complex because it has three forks nowadays: the Chinese characters, the kana characters, and the Roman alphabet as well. Now, we spent some time in China. Let's leave and go off west to India, where we find a drastically different model of writing. We arrived during the 3rd century BC in the era of King Ashoka. Edicts of the king have been found in both Aramaic and in Greek. There's undisputed evidence of the presence of alphabets in India at the time. One that was strictly consonantal, Aramaic, and the other that contained vowels and consonants, like Greek. In this environment, a new script called Brahmi appears, but it doesn't seem to match either of these models of the alphabet. It's something completely new. How is this new script different? And what is its logic? We don't know who invented it, but I'm going to give the inventor a nice Sanskrit name, Siddhartha. Here is Siddhartha's new idea. When we write a consonant by itself, why don't we just assume that it's paired with a vowel already? The vowel A is so common, let's make that our norm. Let's call it the natural vowel. When another vowel needs to combine with that consonant, only then do we attach a small mark to the consonant to indicate that new vowel. That takes a lot less room than using a full letter for the vowels, as in Greek. So let's review this pattern of formation for the consonant K. In the first column, we see the letter Ka in its neutral form. So if we just write K, it's pronounced Ka. It's already a syllable. If we want a long A, we add this little stroke at the top. If we want Ki, we add this bent stroke. If we want a long E, Ki, this symbol, K, Ko, Ku, ku and kan, just a nasal sound, we put this dot. So the resulting combination is a syllable. It came to be called an akshara. And to this day, this is the name used for many Indic languages when describing their syllabic structure. So you might be asking, what happens if a syllable doesn't have a consonant? What if it starts with a vowel alone, like at the start of a word, for a name like Ashoka, the king? In those cases, we designate an independent letter for each vowel, so it can represent the full syllable. Down here, we have a representation of the same vowels implied here by the small marks when we write these vowels alone. So if we wrote Ashoka, this would be our first symbol. If we wanted to indicate nasalization of a vowel, we would simply add this little dot on top. Now let's move on to writing a full word. If I want to write a name like Kamala, very common Sanskrit name, all I need to write is the symbols for K, M, and L. And as you can see up here, I would have Kamala. What if Kamala woke up one day and wanted to call herself Kamala instead? In that case, we would put a little stroke up here that stands for the E sound, and she would become Kamila. Now, someday later, her friends start to nickname her Kumala. To do so, we would simply put a little sign meaning U on the K, and we have a different name, Kumo. This new system was so effective and readily grasped that it spread everywhere. It came to be called the Brahmi system, and it gave birth to many other scripts. It spread around the Indian subcontinent. The Sanskrit language, as used in Buddhist writings, was a main instrument in its spread. In the first circle of influence for Brahmi script, we can see many different scripts developed based on the model in the Indian subcontinent. They all represented the Sanskrit language, but also different regional languages. Many are visually different, but they're structurally identical. Of course, there are resemblances as well. Here we see the letter Ka represented in many of the major scripts of India. The second circle of influence was Southeast Asia, where the same system was adopted, although visually one could hardly see a resemblance. The primary scripts in this area that we can see are Cambodian, Thai, Lao, and Burmese. In addition, the Philippine Islands also developed scripts based on the same model, as well in the Indonesian islands. Here we see Balinese and Javanese. The third circle of influence is a bit indirect, and it's in East Asia. The Japanese kana syllabaries were given several orders. One of them, devised by Buddhist monks, is called Gojuon. The Gojuon order is based on Sanskrit. And as we can see here, there are obviously some gaps, and the sequence is not identical, but it's very closely matched. There's many sounds that are not shared between Japanese and Sanskrit. So obviously, there would be some open slots but we can see the vowel sequence in the same order and the consonant sequence in roughly the same order. The final circle of influence is hypothetical. This happens to be, here we see the Ethiopic writing system preceded by the South Arabian symbols on which it was based. Now, Ethiopic writing was a consonantal alphabet derived from South Arabian until around 400 AD, when suddenly Ethiopic script changed from consonantal to syllabic. What factors do we know about this? We know that commercial ties between the Ethiopian kingdom and Indian merchants were constant at that period. We know that no other syllabic systems existed in the area. The speed of change doesn't account for gradual development. If the change is influenced by the presence of Greek and Coptic, as many have argued, why didn't they just add letters for vowels and make it turn into a full alphabet? So part of the hypothesis behind this disputed idea is the fact that we see consistently little marks attached to consonant symbols. This column depicts the consonants in their more or less neutral form. The other columns show additions. And as you can see, these marks attach themselves, sometimes modifying the shape of the letter, and sometimes only appearing as appendices, basically slapped on in a way that's very similar to the Brahmic system. Now, I know this is conjecture, but it would be a nice topic for a dissertation for an ambitious graduate student who wants to prove or disprove this idea. In this brief overview, we've seen three types of writing. We've seen the alphabet. Here we see two alphabets, the Latin alphabet and Arabic. We've seen syllabaries or alpha syllabaries. Here we see the Devanagari syllabary used to write the Hindi language. And then we've seen phonosemantic writing, as in this case, represented by Japanese, systems that combine meaning and sound. Nowhere do we see strictly pictorial writing ever representing language. We've seen that when more people need to write, they tend to simplify letter forms. However, as we've seen in the Egyptian model, simplification is always slowed down by common agreement. Writing is a social thing. We write so that others can read what we write. So if someone wants to simplify, that process has to go slowly enough so that one's peers continue to understand what's being simplified. So there are many competing trends. We see writing systems and languages appear and disappear. Sometimes it's difficult to understand why they disappeared, but they happen to disappear for many different reasons, sometimes benign, sometimes malicious. Now, for those of you who were hoping to see emoji dominate the globe as the next word script, to those of you, I would like to say this. Thank you. Now I'm ready to receive your questions.
Bravo, Kamal. That was an excellent wrap up. I am showing the crying with laughter emoji right now. Let's take a look at the Q&A. and see what we have. Also, people, please, I did notice a bunch of questions for Kamal pop up in the chat. Please drop those in the Q&A so I don't have to go looking back through the chat to find them. We have a question from Sarah, who asks, Kamal mentioned that hieroglyphs gave 3 forms of meaning: direct meaning, representational, phonetic meaning, and category. Sarah wants to clarify the last element. Does category refer to syntactic meaning or something else?
Category is a way of removing ambiguity from the writing. So, for example, if something is not clearly male or female, let's say a category, or what the Egyptologists call them determinatives, a symbol would be put in meaning female, and it would be understood from the context that this implies this is the female person. So it's for additional clarification. Some person is referred to, and it's followed by a symbol that means royalty or God. So we know here, this is not just any Amenhotep, this is King Amenhotep, okay? That's the intent of the category or determinative use of hieroglyphics. And not all of them could play that role. Yes.
That is super interesting. I feel like determinatives have come up in many other writing systems, not just.
Yes, if I'd like to add, you noticed in Chinese, we came across this idea as well. There's no connection whatsoever between Chinese writing and hieroglyphics, but the same concept is very useful and appears in Chinese. In Chinese, it appears first, so it's nice that you get a warning. It's a little bit like the introductory question mark of Spanish. Tells you, hey, this is following, this is coming. In hieroglyphics, it came at the end of a sequence. In any case, these were born these were invented as scripts became more sophisticated, and as more and more people write, there tends to be new symbols tend to be created to lessen ambiguity.
Okay, great answer. Let's see. Nahid, and forgive me if I mispronounce someone's name. Nahid asks, if time allows, would you please elaborate on Farsi writing and its history? That's a lecture right there.
Farsi writing and its history. As was quickly implied, mentioned about Aramaic, the situation in the Persian kingdoms at one point, they did not use Persian or Farsi as the official language of the kingdom because it spanned such a large regional space, and Aramaic had a strong presence in some of those already. So that was used as the language of the empire. At the same time, the presence of Aramaic writing invited people to invent new scripts derived from Aramaic that were used for writing Persian. So Avestan, for example, was used to write Old Persian. After the Arabs conquered Persia, those scripts were replaced with Arabic, and it came to be written strictly with the Arabic alphabet. However, in that process, there was the beginning of extending the Arabic alphabet to represent languages totally unrelated to Arabic, like Persian. So their new characters were invented to play that role. And these characters were not originally part of the Arabic alphabet. I'm sure you already know that if you're familiar with Persian.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Youngmi asks, have you looked into the Korean writing system? How does this fit into your talk? You did touch on it, but
I did touch on it. There isn't enough time to go into it, but I can say something very quickly that would give you an idea. Basically, Korean writing, the syllabary called Hangul, is one of the most unusual scripts ever devised, because it doesn't have a long development period like systems that start with a pictorial and then attempt to represent language and add other symbols and simplify and so on. This script was created by decree. I think it's in the 1400s. King Sejong of Korea brought together a team of scholars and told them to create a writing system specifically fit for Korean. And they did just so. It's obvious they were very advanced in their knowledge of phonetics, because they understood where sounds were created, and they came up with an alphabet consisting of all the different sounds of the Korean language at that time. And then they didn't use it as an alphabet. They used it as an element, as elements of the syllabary. And unlike the Indic akshara, which was always a consonant followed by one vowel, the Korean language has closed syllables. So instead of just ka, you more typically would have a sequence like kat, ka, pop, pak. So they formed a system called Hangul, which use the alphabetic elements called jamo. And basically you compose in a square formation a closed syllable. So if you want to write tak, you have the three elements together in a square representing that syllable. So that's how structurally, that's how the Korean system works. In terms of its visual appeal, what's interesting is they use Chinese-like strokes in depicting the forms. So to someone unfamiliar from a distance, it has some Chinese feel to it. The pen strokes are very similar. It's speculative as to where they got the idea for syllabic. Was it just, was it born within that group of scholars, or did they take the idea from Indian scripts? It's hard to know. In any case, Buddhist literature was in Korea, so the idea of Sanskrit and syllables would not have made it so foreign, but if that's speculative, I wouldn't know. Another dissertation there.
Absolutely. Well, we did have a Letterform lecture a while ago given by Lars Kim, specifically on Hangul. So I believe Stephen Coles dropped that in the chat, and I also added that to the Q&A. So after we're done today, everybody can go watch that one and learn more about Hangul. Let's see. Keith Murphy asks, you sort of just addressed this, especially with the emoji, But I'm wondering, I just finished I.J. Gelb's A Study of Writing, and he insisted that Maya hieroglyphics had no phonetic qualities, but he was proven wrong 25 years later. So do all pictographic systems actually have phonetic qualities?
Sorry, do all pictographic systems?
Systems have phonetic qualities as well.
Let me put it this way. Well, yeah, Professor Gelb turned out to be wrong about many things, although he was obviously very qualified to write. But like in the same way that European scholars held for a long time that Egyptian writing must be hocus pocus, it's not really a representation of language because it's so pictorial. Obviously, Gelb turned out to be wrong about Maya writing because it's also involves syllables. Regarding the question of are all pictorial systems also phonetic, let's say this: no existing script that can be traced representing language is ever free of phonetic elements. So we can look, I know I didn't cover any Mesopotamian writing systems, but basically we have full evidence that Sumerian or Mesopotamian writing began for simple record keeping. Basically, you write 3 symbols of a sheep, meaning I owe you 3 sheep, or 15 sacks to say that the governor's house has collected 15 sacks of grain from someone. However, as you start representing language, that turns out to be insufficient. People start to revert to double use of symbols to indicate some kind of sound. A good analogy for pictorial systems alone is to think of them like bones. Let's think of emoji. Emoji can represent a feeling, an object, all these things alone quite successfully. You can show a dog, you can show a human, you can show a smile, but like bones alone, a skeleton isn't held together just as bones. If you have a skeleton without soft tissue, the skeleton falls apart. Soft tissue, we can think of as an analogy for the sound element, the phonetic element. So together, soft tissue and bones make a human body and make it effectively usable. One without the other isn't enough.
Well, I always like.
So I would challenge you, since I know Keith Murphy, I would challenge you to find a surviving writing system, a writing system that is simply pictorial, that actually represented human language.
Okay, the gauntlet has been thrown. Gauntlet is down. I was going to commend you for your skeleton analogy, Kamal. I'm always up for a good, skull and bones analogy. Let's see. We have a question from, Michael writes Mayan inscriptions. Question mark.
I don't know much about Mayan inscriptions, but I know they contain a syllabic system as well. And there again, early on, scholars insisted this is simply pictorial because it looks pictorial. But as we've seen in both Chinese and Egyptian hieroglyphics, just because it looks like a picture doesn't mean it's only a picture. But I really can't expand on the general category Mayan inscriptions alone. Today, let's say the key to deciphering is well on its way. It doesn't mean everything is deciphered, but a very large part is deciphered, and symbols are known, and there are many people working in this field.
So it has been partially deciphered at this point, but we're still
Yes.
still
So
waiting.
it's known not to be a simply pictorial system.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Jose Diaz asks, it's very clear that the additions in the print or black part of the letters represent different symbols. But are there, can you say something for the negative space? So have you seen some negative area kept large for maybe another symbol? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, Jose, but it's, I think Jose is asking about, you know, any letter forms that are mostly about the counter space than about the exterior form, the black part. I don't know.
There is such, looking at it globally over many different scripts, there is such a variety of ways of approaching form, and that the concept of counter and white space and so on is not a good gauge for how people invent scripts. It may be true of the Latin Greek family, but it's not generally true everywhere.
Good. Okay. But not. Okay. I hope that answered the question, Jose. Thank you. Riane Ross Hager asks, in general, how did these early writing systems develop? Who created them? Who used them? And what were the literacy rates? And Riane, thanks to you for the wonderful presentation.
We can say in general that very often ancient writing systems were devised either for administrative purposes, record keeping, or for religious purposes. For example, Chinese, like for reading omens. But eventually, somehow, the idea comes into people's minds to say, well, if we're writing, if we can write, you owe me 3 sheep. How can I write, I will see my wife tomorrow? How can we put symbols down that somebody else can look at later and say, I meant to say, I will see my wife tomorrow? That's a much more challenging task. And typically that was a long transition. If we take the example of Egyptian hieroglyphics, for example, the use of individual hieroglyphs as single consonants is a later development. And it came as a way of lessening ambiguity. So again, this trend happens over and over again. As you get more readers, you need to lessen ambiguity. If the readers are restricted to a professional class, like priests or scribes, they can make things as complicated as they wish. That's all they do all day. But once you gain a larger readership, it moves towards simplification of forms. Of course, simplification of form is always competing with convention. if the original symbol is a circle and you want to simplify it to a square, you can't do that in one step because otherwise people can't read. But of course, there are many writing systems that probably never went beyond the symbolic or record keeping. We know about the ones, or the surviving ones, or the ones that have left some imprint that also represented language. So we may get surprises in the future, things we uncover, but I think it seems to be a common factor that adding some kind of phonetic element is a thing people look for or have used. Another technique that I didn't cover, which is used in Egyptian hieroglyphics, is the rebus. Rebus is where you have a symbol. It's used, you can see it in the Chinese system, where it says, is female, but sounds like ma, and the result is ma as the mother. The other is like if you have a symbol for bee, the insect, the bee, and then you just write to be to represent the verb to be, something like that. That's another way of moving from pictorial to phonetic.
Okay, awesome. I was trying to put belief in a rebus in the chat. There we go.
You can. It's quite simple.
I did with
English.
emoji. We're coming full circle, right? Let's see.
Yes.
We have a bunch more questions and we don't have a lot of time. So people upvote the questions you want to see answered because we probably won't get to all of them.
How much time do we have left?
We have to end at 1:30. So let's get those questions upvoted. We have one question here that several people are interested in. Eugenie Bidot asks, what do you think about the recent decipherment of linear Elemite? I didn't think such an old writing system could be so abstract. And Sina is also curious to hear that answer.
I'm sorry, can't comment because I know nothing about Elemite.
Okay.
I just know roughly where it is, but that's I don't know anything in that area.
Okay, further research is needed. I've got to check this out too. Okay, Harant Papazian asks how to fit in invented scripts into all this, including old ones like Armenian and Hangul and new ones like Adlam.
How to
fit invented scripts into all of this.
All scripts are invented. They're just invented at different rates. And I can comment about Adlam, which is a very recent invention for the Fulad family of languages in West Africa. A very clever invention. It's very unusual to see a script succeed at this rate, and especially taking into account all the obstacles that were in the way. Hangul and Armenian, for example, had some form of authority behind them when they were invented. Father Mashtots behind Armenian, King Sejong behind the Hangul, but Adlam is very unusual because it was two adolescent boys that invented it, of course, with some guidance from adults around them that were very helpful. But it is really the exception of the exceptions, but it's not the only such thing that's happening now, because communications and quick exchange of documents have allowed us to do this, do something now, especially in the last 2 decades, that were unthinkable before. I've recently worked on a newly invented alphabet for an Indian community that's 1,500 people, and it's invented as new by a literacy worker with the speakers of the language. So I think we've opened the door. We have the means of doing that now. Of course, it requires a lot of work. The key to success of these new scripts is ability to exchange them in a public forum. So that's why the successful ones get registered in Unicode, so that electronically they can be communicated everywhere and mean the same thing, not just be pictures. So I hope I've answered your question, Grant.
Yeah, I think that was a great quote from you, Kamal. All scripts are invented just at different rates. I really, really appreciate that.
Well, these new scripts are invented solely for writing.
Mm-hmm.
So they skipped a bit with the pictorial stage. That's
and Jim De La Hunt mentions in the chat that Cherokee is another example of a script invented by historically known people, which was rapidly adopted.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. We have a question here from Ahmad, which Ahmad asks, Turkey has moved away from using Arabic letters. Do you think this is a positive thing? Do you see that this might happen to other nations that use Arabic letters?
Well, it has happened already to other nations that use Arabic letters. I won't really comment whether it's good or bad. I can just describe some things. Classical Arabic, much like Latin, for example, was a language that had very few vowels, just a handful of vowels. When you take a language like that and adopt it for another language that is rich in vowels, and I don't mean to give a value judgment to rich, I just mean language that has many other vowels. You have to extend the system. When Arabic was used for Turkish, there's a lot of ambiguity in the writing. Now, some people will argue and say, but anyone speaking Turkish can guess which vowel was written in what context. However, it's a bit more difficult. So my opinion is that a vocalic alphabet like Latin is an easier fit for the Turkish language than Arabic was. Many Central Asian languages have also used Arabic letters for writing. Tatar, Chechen, Kyrgyz, Kazakh, etc., and many are in the Turkic family of languages. Mm-hmm. Those present very similar problems. It doesn't mean it's bad. One language, one related language, which is interesting, is Uyghur, or as a lot of people say, Uyghur. But the people themselves call themselves Uyghur. They have taken the Arabic alphabet and have changed it from primarily consonantal with long vowels to indicate every vowel that they need for their language. So when they write, it's fully vocalic. So they've gone one step beyond of using an alphabet and extending it to a model that makes it less ambiguous. So very often speakers of Arabic only are very surprised when they see how many additional symbols other languages have created, have extended in the Arabic alphabet for use with their languages. But we have evidence. I mean, a language like Azeri for Azerbaijan has been written in Arabic letters, has been written in Cyrillic letters, is currently being written in Latin letters. So languages themselves are instruments and can be fitted to various writing systems with various degrees of success, depending on how much ambiguity they leave or not. Less ambiguity, I think, is always a positive thing.
So quickly, to follow up, Ahmad asks, wasn't there political or religious influence that was behind this transition?
Yes, for Turkish, yes. Yeah, the ruler of Turkey at that time, Kamal Atatürk, wanted to make Turkey a secular state and to detach the state from Islamic tradition. So that was his intent. It wasn't solely linguistic. So I mean, but that varies from place to place. I mean, the use of Cyrillic for Azeri had nothing to do with the will of the people, had to do with the Soviet Union imposing the use of Cyrillic on the Republic of Azerbaijan at that time.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So I'm picking the one that's the most upvoted from Richard Ishida, who says it's fascinating that scripts developed from pictorial elements to include phonetic and determinative elements in Egyptian, Chinese, Mayan, etc. Is that because of the way humans think, or is it possible that people carried the ideas from one place to another? Whoa.
Specifically, those three examples, I am absolutely sure they didn't carry it from one to the other. I think there's good evidence that our brains think that way, that we tend to categorize things. There's no contact that's known between the Maya, the Chinese, and the Egyptians. And they all three resorted to that technique. It doesn't mean they had to, but I think it's a natural way to think that's common to all humans. That's my personal opinion. I mean, I'm sure others may disagree with me. I think it's a universal trait.
That's super interesting. I mean, I've been reading about how humans look for patterns and identify patterns and organization readily. And it's possible that that's built in, hardwired into our minds, and that would impact the way that we organize language as well.
It could be. On the other hand, I mean, looking at so many different writing systems, it's hard not to be impressed with human creativity and ingenuity. So
Exactly.
We're clever beings. So
Okay, I think we got to wrap it up. I'm sorry to those who didn't get their questions answered, but Kamal, do you have a link that you can share, a place that people can find you if they if they want to follow up with any questions that we could quickly drop in the chat, because it's time to say goodbye.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you so much, Kamal, for that brilliant presentation. And everybody, please tune in soon for our next Letterform lecture. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Kamal, the accolades are landing in the chat.
Okay. Where would you like me to drop a link?
Oh, I don't think we have time for that anymore.
Okay,
People are
all
probably
right.
leaving. But if you can write it quickly in the chat, then we'll save the chat and people can refer to that.
Okay.
But it's not obligatory if you don't have the chat up. It's not necessary if you don't have the chat up.
Okay, you'll send me a log of the
Yes, you'll get a log of the chat and the Q&A as well as the link to the video.
so it has people's emails in it, or
No, it just has their names, but they might want to connect with you is what I was thinking, because we have 9 questions that were still unanswered.
I see. Yeah, I'll see those with the names and see.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I commend you for once again for this brilliant lecture. It was really amazing to see all the variety of human writing systems. And I know we didn't even touch on,
Yeah, that's right.
but it always blows my mind whenever I see them, just the human ingenuity throughout.
Yeah, it really is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm impressed with all these people.
With all the nicknames that you gave the proto city.
Yeah, I don't like anonymous. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, Kamal, we got to sign off now.
Okay.
We'll be in
Thank
touch.
you.
Ciao, and thank
very
you
much,
again.
Brenda. And thank Priscilla for me as well.
Oh, she can hear you.
Thanks, Kamal.
Okay, thank you,
All righty.
Priscilla.
Okay, bye-bye.
You guys made it nice, and thank you for the students. Please convey my thanks to them.
Will do.
It made it so much easier seeing people react.
I hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, it compensated for the other total silence. So
yeah, nobody likes a sea of black screens. I mean,
no.
I like black, and I don't like a sea of dark.
No, it's just blank as nothing. So
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.